Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Before we start the program today, I'd like to thank all our viewers, eminent panelists here on Rajya Sabha Television, many of whom are here with me in the studio, our well-wishers as well as enablers, because we've achieved a milestone today, that of 1 million subscribers on YouTube. Thank you to all of you for your support and your dedicated viewership as well, without whom all this would not have been possible. Let's now get straight down to business. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un signed a very comprehensive document after their historic summit today, with the US President saying that the process of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula will begin very soon, and the North Korean leader promising to leave the past behind. The two leaders had a one-on-one meeting with translators only, followed by an expanded meeting including their top aides and working lunch at Capella Singapore hotel in Sentosa Island after months of diplomatic twists and turns. We are signing a very comprehensive document and we've had a really great time together, a great relationship, Trump said while signing the document along with Kim in the presence of media at the end of the summit, the first between a sitting US president and North Korea's top leader. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the Trump-Kim summit. Joining me on the program today are Neeraj Srivastav, former diplomat, Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar, Director, Society for Policy Studies, KP Nair, strategic analyst, and Professor S.D. Muni, foreign affairs expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Professor, I'd like to begin with you. Were you surprised at all by how the summit took place in Singapore today?
Well, in a way, it is a surprise because, you know, the kind of dialogue which was going on between Trump and Kim and their associates in the last 2-3 months. And as Trump himself has admitted that it took us 3 months and 3 days to arrive at a place of summit which we have done. It is a surprise, but it is, I think, a big step so far as history of this region is concerned, particularly, if not the world history. But it is the beginning. And the kind of hopes which have been expressed will have to be watched as the situation unfolds. There are no big breakthroughs, even if you look closely into the joint statement, but there is a lot of promise, and that's why one has to sit down and wait how it unfolds. There are 3 very significant areas. One is, of course, the security of North Korea and the North Korean leadership. Second is the development, which also includes the peace 1953 terminated conflict between the 2 Koreas, which have taken place. And third, of course, is the denuclearization of North Korea. And not only North Korea, they are talking about the Korean Peninsula. Not only Korean Peninsula, in fact, they are talking about the region around, which includes Japan to some extent. So let us see. These are big questions, a very complicated roadmap which is there. One can only keep hopes alive and fingers crossed.
Sure. You know, Commodore, was too much made out of this summit because the word historic was used extensively over the last week or so, or the last month for that matter. But did it pack a punch at the end?
Well, I would say it was hyped. And maybe I can say this with a straight face that television has a large, shall we say, responsibility. Though, mind you, in the same breath, I should congratulate you and Rajya Sabha TV for getting 1 million viewers.
But subscribers, not viewers. Viewership is at 15 crores.
Okay. But I think, you know, more seriously, there was a lot of build-up, you know, to this particular event. And I think the global media and these days social media do contribute in their own way. But I was a little hesitant to use the word historic for 2 reasons. One is, if you look at global history, particularly military history, in a post-World War II context, you know, the 2 really big summits to my mind, personally, one was Yalta. And the other, I would say, was Reykjavik, you know, between Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev.
In 86.
86, which marks the beginning of the end of the Cold War. In that sense, perhaps Singapore, I would make the case, is not at the same level. But it is historic to the extent that a sitting president of the United States actually sat across the table with the North Korean leader. And maybe as images go, today we saw in Singapore the 2 flags, that of the United States and the North Korean. And as Professor Muni rightly pointed out, as recently as maybe even 1 month ago, it seemed very improbable. And 1 year ago, they were trading insults about Little Rocket Man and senile dotard, etc., etc. So to that extent, perhaps it is historic in that sense. But, you know, if one were to summarize the summit, it was rich in symbolism. And I think the fact that the US and North Korea are at least agreeing to talk is in itself significant.
In a way,
very
was it
lofty
also,
in aspiration.
Was it also our fault for expecting too much?
Perhaps, you know, there was too much of, as I said, I use the word hype to say that it was all built up in a certain way. But I would say that the substantive part is very limited and there is no surprise there. Because the problem is so intractable. And if you look at the way in which even the word denuclearization has been approached, the Americans were talking about a very comprehensive kind of irreversible, verifiable dismantling of North Korea's nuclear program. There's no mention of that in the final 4 paragraphs. All that the North Koreans have done is to commit themselves to April 27th, which is the Inter-Korean Declaration, which is a fairly detailed document, but that again is, shall we say, a commitment. So it's the beginning of a very long process to be welcomed cautiously, but I think we have to really take a day at a time, because a lot of people are saying that when President Trump goes back to the US, will he send some tweet en route to say that I may have changed my mind, you know, but that's a possibility.
Okay, all right. Ambassador, let me bring you in now. You know, who would you say has emerged as a victor after this summit? Which side?
Well, I think although it is not desirable to talk in terms of victor and vanquished, but if you ask me, I would say that North Korea has emerged as the victor, because this was a country which was isolated since the Korean War. This was a country which was a pariah regime, which was threatened with all kinds of consequences, and just till 6 months ago, it was being threatened with total annihilation. And then you have a situation where the US president not only comes to face-to-face meeting with the Korean leader Kim Jong-un, but sits down with him, has detailed talks, and also signs a document. And and all the while, North Korea still retains its nuclear weapons. Whereas if you look at the American statements still even a few weeks ago, statements of people like John Bolton and others, they were suggesting that the primary condition for a summit is that North Korea should give up its nuclear weapons. Then we can talk, you know, about other things.
Sure.
Now here you find that not only has North Korea not given up its nuclear weapons, there is no deadline which has been laid down also in black and white for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So I would say that it is a big climb down for Mr. Trump, and it is for this reason that I would wait and I would watch what happens when he returns to the US and what happens in the following weeks and months.
Sure.
You know, when lobbies and hardliners, they ask him the question that, you know, you did not deliver a denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. You met him, you signed an agreement, and you know, there is no timeline, nothing like that.
Right.
So we will have to wait and see, because it has been, as pointed out by some of your guests earlier, it is the beginning of a process. It is just the first step.
Okay, it's the beginning of a process, and it looks like North Korea has come up trumps as far as this particular summit is concerned, and as we see it right now. Let me take what you're saying to Mr. KP Nair now. You know, Mr. Nair, looking back at the insults hurled, at the rhetoric between North Korea and the United States, are you surprised at how amicable the two looked when they met today, in contrast to what happened at G7?
You see, amicable on the surface. Trump can be a charmer when he wants to be, and he was. The optics were very good when they met and all that. But I am very excited about this summit for another reason, you know. I have the joint statement here with me, and I am very excited about the style rather than the substance. I am the only journalist on this panel, and I can see here on the joint statement that Neeraj will know, he has been at so many of similar summits. These things have to be done in a hurry, in a matter of minutes, the joint statement, or at least hours. And the joint statement has two typefaces. There is one which gives the usual thing about the meeting, starting, the objectives, all very laudable. But the substantive part is in a different typeface, which means that the North Koreans insisted that their point of view should be put down. And in the middle of the joint statement, in a different typeface, they have this communist phraseology, For example, in the outcomes, the first one talks in typical communist phraseology about the desire of the peoples of the two countries for peace and prosperity. But the most interesting of these in the different typeface is the second item, in which North Korea commits itself to lasting and stable peace regime, Nowhere in that is, see, even last night, TV stations all over the world were going to town, some with papers written CVID, comprehensive, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. In the substantive part of it, there is no reference to it, It merely says that Kim Jong-un agreed to denuclearization, not comprehensive, not verifiable, not irreversible, which makes me think that Kim had his way, Otherwise, in the normal course, this is the best giveaway, two typefaces, which means they just lifted the Korean part of what they gave as decisions and pasted it and released the joint statement.
So at the end of the day, Kim Jong-un had his way is what Mr. KP Nair is suggesting. Talking about Kim Jong-un, what he said at the summit was the world will see a major change. What major change can we expect, Professor Muni?
Well, before that, let me put the other side of the picture. I think all the other panelists are saying that the US has been a loser.
No, I did not.
Well,
not a loser, but anyway, we'll.
Well, that he has given more than what Kim has done. Look at the whole situation. It was Kim who first said he's dismantling his tunnels for testing and all that. He's the one who changed his nuclear generals. He's the one who gave the American soldiers which were there. Now, even in the joint statement, Kim from the beginning has been talking about the whole region, including Japan. The statement does not include Japan. It simply says Korean Peninsula, which means because Japan was insisting that it would not come in under this kind of a cover, and the Japanese, they still have their reservations about the missiles which are there in North Korea. So look at all this situation. Now, this phrase has not been used of VCID, which still is unfolding. I would say what kind of a disarmament or denuclearization of North Korea will take place remains to be seen. Denuclearization, I think Uday will tell us, is not a very easy process. It is a very complicated process, which even President Trump in his press conference explained that it is not going to take place overnight. So let us wait and watch, but to the extent that gives up the nuclear weapons like the Libyans gave up, or to some extent even Iranians gave up, would be a major change in this kind of a region. And if it is decided, and Trump had hinted at it, he said he has 32,000 troops in South Korea and we want to withdraw them. And Trump has promised that he will not have the war games or the exercises with South Korea, which is some sort of a relief. In fact, I thought the ball was, whatever the Kim has done, the ball was in the Trump's court. And it is this concession, Trump's no exercises, and a hint that we may have to reduce our troops there, is something of a trigger which will let Kim proceed further, and let us see that they proceed further.
Sure.
I think, as Ambassador said rightly, don't divide it between the losers and gainers. It is a win-win situation.
Okay, it is a win-win situation is what Professor Muni is suggesting. But since we are here, Commodore, let's talk about the process of denuclearization itself. What is it really?
Well, I think just to pick up from what Professor Muni has said, denuclearization per se for a country like North Korea, which has already acquired credible WMD, weapons of mass destruction capability, both the nuclear weapon and the missile, will be a very long process if the Americans indeed want to make it comprehensive, irreversible, verifiable, and ensure that there is complete dismantlement. At a very, very conservative kind of timeline, I would say it could take anything between 10 to 12 years if they are going to work at breakneck speed and have inspections, etc., which is a very, very low probability. But I want to add one other line, if I may, Frank, in relation to both the United States and North Korea. My own sort of point or interpretation was that this problem is so complex that we cannot reduce it to a binary. Maybe the North Korean position could have been accommodated by the Americans. KP has some points to make about the language, the semantic, the font size, etc. My own point is that I am cautiously welcoming President Trump's initiative, because what he has done as the US president is he has rendered the East Asian region just a little more malleable. Meaning, if this summit had failed, I mean, as recently as May 24th, Donald Trump releases a letter to the media saying that he is very sorry, but because of North Korea's behavior, I have no option but to cancel the summit. This happens on 24th May. 12th of June, we have a summit. What happened in these 2.5 to 3 weeks? Was there a review? Was there some kind of determination that he and his advisors had come to? Because remember, he had said John Bolton will not be part of this team because Mr. Bolton is very well known for his anti-North Korea kind of position. So I'm just suggesting that between them, both between the North Korean leadership, Mr. Kim, and Mr. Trump, the US president, they have rendered this a little more malleable. And I think Mr. Trump is going to get a lot of heat when he goes back.
Sure.
Because his detractors will compare this with the Iran deal and say, here is a president who walks out of Iran saying it's a bad deal, and he comes back from Singapore with not even one assurance that a single North Korean missile that can reach the United States is not on writing on the table. Forget what the Japanese are saying, forget what the South Koreans. So I think he has taken a certain step. I don't think it's a blind step. There must be some kind of logic. What he and Mr. Kim have discussed, we don't know. Which is why I'm saying take it a day at a time.
Okay, let's take it a day at a time and wait for what happens once Trump gets back to the United States. But before that, you know, Ambassador, as far as North Korea is concerned, as far as the issue of denuclearization of the peninsula itself is concerned, what's it going to take? And what is it that North Korea would like in return from the United States and the rest of the world?
North Korea, first of all, would like a peace treaty to be signed to signal the end of the Korean War, first of all. Secondly, it would want ironclad guarantees, preferably enshrined in a UN Security Council resolution, guaranteeing the safety and the security of North Korea. This is the second thing. Third thing is that it would want financial and economic aid to rebuild at home, to improve its economy, and to improve the standard of living of its citizens, so that Kim has something to show domestically also. He needs to show to the North Korean people that this is what he has got in return. But I'd like to make one more point. Somebody has said this, that, you know, it is very difficult sometimes for human beings to unlearn what you have already learned. And in that sense, you know, the complex calculations, the mathematics, the physics, all these other parameters regarding nuclear weapons will be there with the North Korean leadership. You know, it will be there. The only thing is that they will destroy their testing sites, and they have already once, in fact, destroyed their, you know, one of the reactors also, if you remember. So this time they only destroyed one tunnel.
Sure.
In the past, they destroyed a reactor. what happened after the destruction of that reactor? Nothing. It went back to square one. So the Americans, what they are primarily and only interested in is defanging North Korea and removing its nuclear capability.
Right.
On the other hand, North Korea knows that the only card which it has to play, which is first of all its nuclear capability, and second and more important, very important, is the tens of thousands of artillery pieces which are pre-positioned, to attack Seoul in case somebody tries to attack North Korea, and there is no defense against 15,000 pieces of artillery firing at Seoul. And if you ask me, the single most important reason why Trump has climbed down from his high perch is that both Japan and South Korea have told him that you cannot, you cannot play with our security, and that you cannot destroy North Korea.
Sure. Sure.
It's the military capability of North Korea which has produced this agreement.
All right.
Otherwise, Libya, they went and bombed. Iran, they are threatening every day. Why? They don't have the weapons.
Sure. Mr. Nair, that having been said, how are the other players in the region going to react to this? What's at stake for them now?
Well, in my opinion, the biggest winner of today's summit is actually Singapore. Singapore got so much free publicity, I mean, it's not exactly free, because Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said yesterday that Singapore has spent $20 million, US dollars, not Singapore dollars, on this summit. Kim Jong-un's hotel bill, he and his delegation was picked up by the Singapore government, Singapore has gained quite a lot, not just as a tourist center, which it has always been, but also as a place where they can host summit. I mean, Reykjavik did it during Brezhnev's time, Reagan's time, but Singapore did a fantastic job of this. So number one gainer, irrespective of whether the outcome is collapsing or succeeding, Singapore gained. Second, South Korean president. South Korean president's stature has gone up. Not only in the region, but everywhere else, internationally. In fact, he's coming here next month. And I think we will be dealing with the South Korean president very differently from how we dealt with his predecessor, the lady, when she came here last time. So Japan want us to wait and see, because Japan in any case is always cautious, they don't jump into things. But the South Koreans jumped into it. And South Korea will gain a lot, and the South Korean president, for all intents and purposes, has established a kind of modus vivendi with Kim Jong-un, and together they can take it forward.
Right. I've got 2 minutes left on the program, so quick closing comments from all my guests, starting with you, Professor Muni. Where does it leave China? Because China has used North Korea as a proxy in the past as well. What happens there?
In fact, I was about to add, when KP said listed the countries, China was the only one left out. I think China has made a very important contribution, and in a way Trump has acknowledged that, even in his head. Now, Chinese are probably playing two kind of roles. One, they are not very happy with the North Korean nuclear weapons, because that gives a different latitude to the North Koreans, though they have been using it in different ways. And secondly, throughout the coming negotiations, I think they will continue to use North Koreans to make sure that the American presence in the region is reduced,
right,
which ultimately will benefit them.
Sure.
And this is what the argument Americans are making.
Sure. Commodore, denuclearization anytime, is it going to happen anytime in the near future? Can we see unification of the two Koreas?
Well, one word for denuclearization, unlikely, not in a hurry. But I think for the long term, if you look at the spirit of the April 27 declaration between the two Koreas, unification has been referred to, and they are trying to revive the spirit of unity. So that is a long-term possibility, but it again won't be easy, because the current status quo with a divided Korean peninsula suits the interest definitely of the major powers. We are talking about China, United States and Japan. A last word, Frank, where does India come into all of this? I think at some point, India has to look at the linkage between North Korea, Pakistan and China.
Sure.
As far as the nuclear missile transfer is concerned, because that is a latent problem, a sleeper problem in terms of nuclear and missile proliferation, and how do we deal with that? You know, the AQ Khan episode and all
Okay,
that.
out of time. Yes, Professor.
Half a sentence. Don't forget that India was one of the peacemakers in the 50s in the Korean Peninsula.
Indeed, it was. Played a very crucial role as far as the Korean Peninsula was concerned. I'm out of time on the program. I can't get into closing comments from the Ambassador and Mr. KP Nair. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for watching. See you again next time.